Hi, Denise Hazelwood back again with part 3 of my series on the JFK cut and paste assassination. This part is focusing on the Zapruder film as a fabricated piece of so-called evidence. All right, let's take a look at the Zapruder film based on what we can see on YouTube, and then we'll discuss it. So here we have a stabilized version, meaning that the limousine is fairly even. The screen jumps around, but the limousine is fairly even. There's the headshot. Jackie crawling on the back, and Clint Hill. All right, we can see that again real quick. It won't take long. Up here you have the sprocket ghost images on the top and bottom. And Clint Hill runs to the back of the limousine, etc. Okay, let's take a look at another version of the Zapruder film. And this one shows the beginning that you missed on the other one. So this is kind of important. This has the frame numbers on the bottom left. So here we see the lead motorcycles coming down Elm Street. It's more jumpy than the other one because it's not stabilized. So now we see the film without it moving around to stabilize the limousine. I'm going to show it again, and I want to point out a couple of things. Okay, here we go. Right, the lead motorcycles, one was making a really wide turn, and then all of a sudden, after the lead motorcycles, with one making this really wide turn, like to go on this street that's back here somewhere, all of a sudden, the limousine pops into view. Right there. So it leaves the impression that Zapruder stopped filming, maybe to save his film or whatever. But we're going to take a look at what was going on there in just a minute. Okay, so here we go again. Again, this one's not stabilized, so you see it kind of jumpy. You see this is the vice president's follow-up car. Let me back it up a little bit. I'll show you again. President's limousine, Secret Service follow-up car, Johnson's limousine, and Johnson's follow-up car. We saw them in the Altkins photograph. He comes out from behind the sign. He immediately goes into this throat grab or chest grab position. Jackie leans towards him. There's the headshot. Clint Hill running on the back onto the back of the limousine. And there it goes under the railroad triple underpass. Back it up just a little bit. You see the falling man, Malcolm Summers. He's been identified as Malcolm Summers. I also want to point out what other researchers have pointed out, which is this very interesting character. He's been nicknamed Stickman. He's not my observation. This is observation of other researchers before me. But just watch him for a second because he's really kind of weird. Okay, I'll back it up so you can see Stickman again. There goes Stickman. He goes by quickly, but he's just a very weird shaped character. Okay, so you can look up on YouTube and find your own versions of the Zapruder film that you like. These are just a couple that I've shown here. But what we're going to discuss today is the question of authenticity. As you saw in those two versions of the Zapruder film found on YouTube, the limousine does not stop. Yet there are a whole bunch of witnesses who said it stopped or almost stopped or hesitated, and yet you don't see that on the Zapruder film. John Costello, I've mentioned him before. Let me see if I can find him. He has a very nice, interesting website. Where is it? I apparently lost my place. There it is. Okay. Where he's grouped witness statements by what they said, categories of what they said. So here he's got a whole mess of witnesses, and you can find his website. There's the URL for this particular, what the eyewitnesses said, what happened on Elm Street, what the eyewitnesses said. And then he'll show you a bunch of witnesses who said that the limousine stopped, or it almost stopped, it hesitated, whatever. It's worth reading. I recommend you go to his website and take a look at that. So there you go. So we have a whole bunch of witnesses who said that it stopped or came to a near stop. When you have this many witnesses saying the same thing and it doesn't appear on the film, something fishy's going on. All right. And in fact, there may be something else going along here too, because there might have been two stops, and some researchers, James Fetzer and another gentleman, say that there was a third stop on the other side of the triple underpass. I don't know about that, but I do think that there were two stops or almost stops. One right after the turn was a slowdown, a hesitation, or like a rolling stop. And another one concurrent with the fatal, what's been called the fatal headshot. When I'm going to take a look at exactly which shot was the fatal headshot, probably in the next video. Okay. I don't know about the one on the other side of the triple overpass, but some researchers believe that there was one there to allow Clint Hill to get inside the limousine and perhaps even another Secret Service man. This is a video by James Fetzer that we're going to take a look at. I'm going to turn the sound off because he's got this really dramatic music that's very kind of annoying. And this is his, what does he call it? He's using models here to recreate the turn here, a wide turn onto Elm Street. And you can see the string he's using to pull his model along. But this is what he believes is missing from the Zapruder film. And there it kind of pulls to the left of that lane and stops. So that's where James Fetzer puts the stop. And we'll take a look at that again. This is not Zapruder film footage, by the way. As you can tell, it's models being manipulated by pulling it along. And you can, what did he say there? Yeah, the limousine was long and it was hard to turn. Also, if you look at statements from Secret Servicemen, the driver, William Greer, was very cognizant of Kennedy's bad back. He had Addison's disease, or depending on who you listen to, tuberculosis of the spine. But he wore a back brace. He was wearing one during the assassination, which a lot of people have posited held him up to be shot more than once. So here we go. It's long, it's hard to turn, and there is this road here that runs directly in front of the school book depository, which is, back over here. There's some speculation that maybe Greer was missing Elm Street, thinking he needed to go down here. But the fact is that the limo was long and hard to turn. So here it goes again. It makes a wide turn. It comes to the left a bit on that lane, and it stops there or hesitates, because we're going to look at another version of events. But maybe not a full stop, but a rolling stop. I'd like to play Greg Burnham's version of events here. He was not a witness to the assassination, but he saw a, quote, other Zapruder film. So he describes two stops. I'm going to play them both for you. 1530 to 1655. Let me get it up.
About at all. Yes. A couple of things here. This is my best recollection, but I'm not as certain of it. So one example of it, my best recollection is that initially, as that car made that wide turn, that there may have been a stop around the corner of Houston and Elm. Okay, if this wasn't quite such an important thing, I would say it stopped. Okay, my best recollection is that it is, but the truth is I'm not positive. It may have just really slowed down. I mean, equivalent practically to a rolling stop
or a hesitation.
Yeah, real hesitation. Okay, but brief, seemed pretty brief.
Yes.
Okay, and then he describes a little bit later about 2120. Let me pull it back up again. A second stop.
The just before the headshot, the car slowed way down and then came to a complete and full stop. Not a rolling stop, none of that, a complete and full stop. So unlike up at the corner where I said that there was a hesitation and perhaps a complete stop, definitely going extremely slow. I'm not going to go and say I'm sure that it stopped, because I'm really not. But farther down, around where the steps are, there was a complete and full stop of the car. And it was in that stop when the kill shots occurred.
All right. So he's putting a stop down by another stop, a full and complete stop down by the steps, and this is where the kill shot occurred in the other Zapruder film. So here's an account of a stop by Bill Newman. Bill Newman kind of seems to be putting this stop after the headshot, which I will talk about in a later video. But he says after he got down on the ground, as he was looking back at the car, he could remember seeing the taillights of the car, and just for a moment they hesitated and stopped, and then they floorboarded the car and shot off. So he's one of the witnesses to a stop. And then he clarifies, and when I say stop, I mean for a very short period of time. They got on the brakes, it kind of rocked, and then they floorboarded it and accelerated out of there. He says that elsewhere. I'm going to skip watching the video in the interest of time. So one indication that the Zapruder film is a fake is that it doesn't show the stop that so many witnesses saw. I'm going to go back to John Costella's website, because he has some interesting things to say about the Zapruder film. His expertise is in optics and things like that. He points out, and I'm going to point out his website, johncostella.com/JFK/. And here, JFK Assassination Film Hoax. You can go up here. He gives you an introduction with some little GIFs and stuff. And then down here, he gives you some other reasons why the Zapruder film cannot be authentic. And I'm going to recommend you go and read through these. They're very interesting. Like, for example, the blur mistake. If the limousine is traveling and Zapruder is following it with his camera, there's going to be a certain amount of blur, either on the background if he's tracking the limousine exactly, or on the limousine if the background is in clear focus, or perhaps divided between the background and the limousine if he's sort of tracking the limousine but not quite exactly. But the thing is, they can't both be in sharp focus. And Costello points out frames where they are exactly in sharp focus and they should not be. He points out in The Great Zapruder Film Hoax, which is a book edited by Jim Fetzer, and you can find videos of the presentations that went into the creation of the book. You can find that on YouTube. So you might want to listen to the presenters explain why they know that the Zapruder film is not authentic. You can just look that up on YouTube. Okay, moving on. If you want, there's some other researchers who've posted things on YouTube. I suggest searching for Zapruder film alteration, which is a little bit more productive, or a lot more productive than searching for Zapruder film fabrication. Although I do think the whole thing is a big fabrication. All right. Another thing that bears talking about is Doug Horne's 2 NPIC events. Now, what is NPIC? It's the National Photographic Interpretation Center. They're the folks who prepared the briefing boards for the government officials and generals and whatnot of the Zapruder film for these people to look at. So if you Google Doug Horne 2 NPIC events, you'll be able to read more about it. I'm not going to go into too much depth, but I'll just kind of show you. Here's one example of Googling Doug Horne 2 NPIC events, and this is what came up. And he talks about something that happened on the night of the assassination, Friday, November 22nd, at this National Photographic Interpretation Center. They received a film that was slit, which the Zapruder film, when it was processed on Friday in Dallas, it was slit. There was the original film, and there were 3 copies made. But it was slit after it was processed. And this went to the NPIC, where a gentleman, Dino Brugioni, looked at it, prepared briefing boards, and described that the headshot that he saw in that film was different from the one in the film that you and I can see looking on YouTube. On Saturday, the film was sold by Abraham Zapruder to Life magazine. It was sold for the picture rights. And eventually it was realized that, hey, he did not sell the motion picture rights. And so Life magazine went back and purchased the motion picture rights and then never used them, never leased them to anybody else. Apparently they decided that the film was too graphic, that they didn't want anybody to see it. But we're going to talk about that a little bit later too. But that's not an NPIC event. That was an event on the film. An NPIC event, the second NPIC event, was on Sunday night on November 24th. This is after Oswald was killed, and that's very important to realize. This is when the second NPIC event occurred. Now, it happened after Oswald was killed because at that point there was going to be no trial. They could do whatever they wanted with the film. Oswald would never, stand trial, and so as evidence I guess they felt they could do whatever they wanted with it. I don't know. But this is when the second event occurred, when a different team at the National Photographic Interpretation Center got a film that came from, quote, Hawkeye Works, which was the CIA's then secret photographic center in Rochester, New York. And a lot of people put it at Kodak Laboratories. I've got a different theory as to where it was, but where it was is immaterial. The film came from there, and that's important. And it was an unslit film, masquerading as an original. Now remember, the original had already been slit in Dallas, so here's an unslit version of the film. Again, the NPIC was to prepare briefing boards for the generals and so on. So go to, do your YouTube search, Doug Horn 2 NPIC events, and you can read some very interesting information on what was going on with that. The film that was processed on that Sunday night, descriptions of it seem more in line with the extant film than what was processed on Friday night. Okay. So I mentioned Life magazine, which purchased the picture rights on Saturday morning, November 23rd. They purchased the film rights on Monday, November 25th. Now, Dan Rather got to see the film as part of a bidding process to purchase the motion picture rights. And then after seeing the film, he rushed back to the television station and broadcast what he had seen on the film. And we'll be taking a look at what he said about the film in just a minute. The magazine, Life magazine, with the pictures of supposedly of the film, was not published until Tuesday, November 26th. So they had like a little more than a day to, pick and choose frames to use from the altered film. But actually, the next thing in the history of the Zapruder film is that the Warren Commission's Hearing and Exhibits was published, and researchers noticed a few oddities. First of all, frames 208 to 211 were missing. What was labeled 212 was a splice, actually, of frame 208 and 212. 2 frames were switched and misnumbered. That was called a, quote, printing error. The 212 splice was explained as, quote, an accident that happened at the Life photographic processing plant, which, this is the single most important film in the 20th century, and for an accident to happen, I'm not buying that. Especially since there are other splices we'll take a look at that were never explained. Most importantly, Life magazine and its parent company Time had CIA ties. For example, in 1963, the publisher, whose name was C.D. Jackson, had known CIA ties. Carl Bernstein, remember him of Woodward and Bernstein and Watergate, uncovering the Watergate scandal? He wrote a very interesting article called The CIA and the Media. Go ahead and Google CIA and Media and Carl Bernstein and read his article. I highly recommend it. It's very, very interesting. And he mentions Time Life specifically as a publication that had very close ties with the CIA. All right, if you've seen the JFK movie, you remember the back and to the left scene. Let me just replay that for you right here.
The sixth and fatal shot, frame 313, takes Kennedy in the head from the front. This is the key shot. The president going back and to his left. Shot from the front and right. Totally inconsistent with the shot from the depository. Again, back and to the left. Back and to the left. Back and to the left. back, and to the left.
Okay, so that's what the film shows, back and to the left. Let's take a look at what Dan Rather described after he saw the film. And we're going to listen to his whole description. It's about 3.5 minutes long, but it's very interesting.
The films we saw were taken by an amateur photographer who had a particularly good vantage point just past the building from which the fatal shot was fired. The films show President Kennedy's open black limousine making a left turn off Houston Street onto Elm Street on the...
All right, so there, Dan Rather's saying that the film showed the limousine making the turn from Houston Street onto Elm Street. Again, that turn does not appear in the extant version.
Downtown Dallas. A left turn made just below the window in which the assassin was waiting. About 35 yards past the very base of the building, just below the window, President Kennedy could be seen to put his right hand up to the side of his head to either brush back his hair or pressure rub his eyebrow. President Kennedy was sitting on the same side of the car as the building from which the shot came. Mrs. Kennedy was by his side. In the jump seat in front of them, Mrs. Connolly and Governor Connolly. Governor Connolly on the same side of the car as the president, and in the front seat, 2 Secret Service men. Just as the president put that right hand up to the side of his head, you could see him lurch forward. The first shot had hit him. Mrs. Kennedy was looking in another direction and apparently didn't see or sense that first shot or didn't hear it. But Governor Connolly in the seat in front appeared to have heard it, or at least sensed that something was wrong. The governor's coat was open. He reached back in this fashion, exposing his white shirt front to the assassin's window. He reached back as if to offer aid or ask the president something. At that moment, a shot clearly hit the governor.
All right, here's something else that's very interesting. At that moment, a shot very clearly hit the governor. It's been debated among researchers for years as to which frame in the Zapruder film Connolly was hit in, because that's not entirely clear. And we don't really see him reaching back towards the president either. So to continue.
He fell back in the seat. Mrs. Connolly immediately threw herself over him in a protective position.
And we don't see that in the film either. He just kind of falls on top of her. She doesn't throw herself over him.
In the next instant, with this time Mrs. Kennedy apparently looking on, a second shot, the third total shot, hit the president's head. His head could be seen to move violently forward.
Violently forward, not back and to the left. Violently forward is what Dan Rather is describing here.
And Mrs. Kennedy stood up immediately. The president leaned over her way. It appeared that he might have brushed her legs. Mrs. Kennedy then literally went on the top of the trunk of the Lincoln car, put practically her whole body on the trunk. It appeared she might have been on her all fours there, reaching out for the Secret Service man, the lone Secret Service man who was riding on the bumper of the car, the back bumper on Mrs. Kennedy's side. The Secret Service man leaned forward and put his hands on Mrs. Kennedy's shoulder to push her back into the car. She was in some danger, it appeared, of rolling off or falling off. When we described this before, there was some question about what we meant by Mrs. Kennedy being on the trunk of the car. Only she knows, but it appeared that she was trying desperately to get the Secret Service man's attention, or perhaps to help pull him into the car. The car never stopped, it never paused. In the front...
All right, the car never stopped, it never paused. Again, in conflict with what the witnesses reported. So when we talk about alteration, it's possible that there was more than one film alteration.
Secret Service man was on the telephone. The car picked up speed and disappeared beneath an underpass.
And you don't really see the Secret Service man on the telephone in the extant film. Certainly not when it's being shown at full speed. And yet Dan Rather describes it. All right, moving on. So he described the left turn, Connolly reaching back and a shot clearly hitting the governor, Secret Service man on the phone, etc. I want to show another interview, this one with a witness who was there in Dealey Plaza. Let me find it here. Here we go. James Ike Altkins, and I apparently didn't set this up. I guess we'll watch the whole interview. He's the one who took that famous picture right here that we talked about in previous videos. So here's James Ike Altkins and an interview that he made.
As I was getting ready to make some pictures, why, I heard this noise. I thought it was a firecracker explosion. I just went ahead and made the picture, which shows the president right after he was struck by a bullet. Struck in the neck, the first shot. And this was a picture that the Warren report later fixed as being made 2 seconds after the shot was fired. And as they got in close to me, and I was prepared to make the picture, I had my camera almost at eye level. That's when the president was shot in the head. And I do know that the president was still in an upright position, tilted, favoring Mrs. Kennedy. And at the time that he was struck by this blow to the head, it was so obvious that it came from behind. It had to come from behind because it caused him to bolt forward, dislodging him from this depression in the seat cushion.
So here we've got an eyewitness saying that Kennedy bolted forward, dislodging him from the seat. Again, in stark contrast to the back and to the left we remember from the JFK movie with its Zapruder film footage.
And already favoring Mrs. Kennedy, he automatically fell in that direction. The one thing that did seem to be a little bit strange, immediately after the car proceeded on to Parkland Hospital, men with drawn guns ran up the terrace of this plaza up into what is considered to be and referred to as the knoll area, and thinking that they had the assassin cornered up in this knoll area. And it seemed rather strange, as I say, because knowing that the shot came from behind, this fellow had to really move in order to get over into the knoll area.
You have no thoughts about another assassin behind the fence or on the knoll?
I've had a lot of people to contact me, and that they felt there was another person involved in trying to get me to verify either photographs they had or to work out some information they felt they had come across to substantiate the evidence substantiate the fact that there was another assassin. But at no time has any of this evidence proved to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was another assassin. As I was getting...
Okay. So, I wanted to play it through. I wanted you to hear about the men with drawn guns running up the hill. I believe those were Dallas police motorcycle officers and Secret Service men from Johnson's follow-up car. I'll talk more about that in another video. But here again, this is Altkins' photograph. What I'd like to point out in the photograph is this motorcycle officer right here, James Chaney, who said in a statement at Parkland Hospital, he was looking at Kennedy when Kennedy was struck in the face. But look how tall he is compared to Kennedy here, and how close he is to the limousine, peering into the limousine. And yet, we don't see him in the Zapruder film. But given the height difference, even though the limousine dips down to the bottom of the screen in the Zapruder film, we should be able to see Cheney, because he's taller than the limousine, look right next to the limousine, looking in at Kennedy, and yet he does not appear in the Zapruder film. And that's not an observation unique to me, although I don't know that other researchers point out the height, that Cheney was so much taller than the limousine in the Altkins photograph. But that has been pointed out by other researchers. I'd like to take a look at Abraham Zapruder's Warren Commission testimony, because there's some interesting things in that indicating that the Zapruder film is not the film that he made on the day of the assassination. So he says, first of all, I started shooting when the motorcade started coming in. I believe I started and I wanted to get it coming in from Houston Street. And as the car came in line, that meaning after the turn, I believe it was almost in line, blah, 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 I heard a shot. I heard the first shot and saw the president lean over and grab himself. Okay, once again, the extant film does not show the turn that he said he believed he started filming the turn. He wanted to get it coming in from Houston Street, not seen on the extant film. What else does he say? There is a clip. He made an interview immediately after the assassination, a slightly different version of events, but we'll take a look at what he said.
She was right behind me. And as I was shooting, as the president was coming down from Houston Street making his turn.
There it is again. He filmed the turn.
It was about halfway down there. I had a shot. And he slumped to the side like this. Then I had another shot or two. I couldn't say what it was, one or two. And I saw his head practically open up, all blood and everything. And I kept on shooting.
So when he does that, where he saw the president's head open up, it's more forward than the Parkland Hospital witnesses put it. He puts it more on the side of the head, whereas the back of the head blowout witnesses put it back behind the ear. I'm not quite sure how to reconcile the differences, except that perhaps when that headshot occurred, because it was kind of on the right side of his head, we'll take a look at Sherry Feaster's drawing of what happens when billiard cues gets hit on the edge, but it kind of may have turned his head to the left and caused a rapid turning of the head that made it appear that the blowout was more forward than it actually was. But anyway, moving on. And he did say one other thing that is in conflict with what I think when he said the president was about halfway down there. I'll explore that in another video. All right, going on. I want to look back at his Warren Commission testimony again, because he says more interesting things than just then he filmed the turn. Wesley Libeler asks him to look at a picture, and he says, well, if these were taken from the film I had, and Libeler is saying, well, they were. There might be some question about that. And then Libeler shows him frames 185 and 186, which are part of Commission Exhibit 885. And we're going to take a look at that picture in just a minute. And Libeler says they're going down Houston Street now. And Zapruder says, yes, this is before, this shouldn't be there. the shot wasn't fired, was it? You can't tell from here. And Libeler makes no response. And then Zapruder says, I believe it was closer down here where it happened. Of course, on the film, like, whatever. But he's looking at frame 185, and he's saying, you can't tell something has already happened. And Libeler says, but it does look like one of your frames, doesn't it? And so what does he do? Yeah, it looks like one of his frames, maybe, but not exactly like one of his frames. So we're going to take a look at what he was shown as picture 185 of Commission Exhibit 885 when Zapruder had that confusion about what they were talking about. This is it. And in the extant film, Kennedy is waving. Nothing has happened. No wonder he's confused, because I believe that something happened when the limousine was back here, not when it was up on the other side of the sign. So take a look at the picture Zapruder was shown and understand his confusion. I think he's saying, I believe it was back in here when something happened. All right, here's the same frame in color. And just a couple of things to point out. Again, Kennedy looks fine. This is George Hickey. I've discussed him in the first 2 videos, or actually 3, because one I broke up into 2 parts. I'd like to point out his gaze is returning to front. Back here, when he was further back here, his gaze was down, distinctly down and to the left, down towards this way. And we're going to talk about that more in the next video. But what else to look at? Jackie, you can see her hat, and you can see that she is turning towards Kennedy. I'd also like to point out the seat back. This is Governor Connolly. This is supposed to be the back of his jump seat. Some interesting things going on there I'll point out in a minute. In the Warren Commission's hearing and exhibits, there was a splice. That means a joining together of 2 frames. And you can see the splice going along right there. And researchers noticed this splice and said, hey, something funky is going on. Here's the top of the tree. Here's the bottom of the tree. Here's this line. And where the heck are frames 207, 208, 209, 210, 211? Or actually, I think they had 207. But where are frames 208, 9, 10, and 11? They're not published in the book. Why not? What's going on? Well, the Warren Commission couldn't deny that this was spliced. So it became the story of, oh, the film was accidentally damaged at Life magazine. Yeah, right. But there were other splices in the film, and these were never explained. Here's one at frame 155, and you can see the splice coming up here and going down and underneath the tire of that car and through the people. You see how extraordinarily long this man's arm is, like a gorilla arm or something. That one was never explained, and there are others that were also never explained. So there's red marking showing the splice. I'm going to show you this because this YouTube has since disappeared. It was called The Strange Thing About the Zapruder Film. And here are a couple of images from that YouTube, which you can't watch anymore. I looked for it. I wanted to show it to you, but it's not there. Comparing the Zapruder film and the Nix film. So here's the Zapruder film and this little cluster of people here where there are 3 adults and 1 child. And this is right after Malcolm Summers dives onto the ground. And in the Nix film, you have more people. You have 5 adults and 1 child. So that was very strange. Another thing from that YouTube that's no longer there is this blank area of grass right here. It has nobody standing on it. in the next film, there's this, the poster called an old lady who's missing from over here. So how do you explain that? And yet another very interesting thing. This is a video posted by Gerda Dunkel, and we'll go ahead and watch this. And I may scrub through it, make it go a little faster here. And you see after the headshot, it looks like he's just sitting up with his arm resting on the seat. And yeah, and she'll show it again. So there's something weird. And I'll also pay attention to this telephone pole. I'll show it to you again in a minute. Here it is in front of the limousine. Oops, there it is on the other side of the street. How'd that happen? Yeah, okay. So here's the jumping lamppost. Here it is blocking, between the camera and the limousine. And there's Clint Hill climbing into the limousine, and the lamppost is now on the other side of the street. Clint Hill blocking the lamppost. Yeah, okay. That was found by another researcher, not by me, but it bears showing as one of the oddities pointing to Zapruder film fabrication. Another thing other researchers have noticed is the Gene Hill and Mary Moorman shoes in the Zapruder film. Earlier in the day, when they parked to go to go watch the motorcade, Mary Moorman had her camera and she had like 2 pictures left, so she took the pictures to use up the film. So there's Gene Hill getting out of the car, like within an hour or two of the assassination. Notice her black shoes. Here's Mary Moorman getting out of the car. Notice her black shoes. Gene Hill's shoes, Mary Moorman's shoes, and yet in the Zapruder film, they both have white shoes. But since we're looking at this frame, this image, what is this weird thing on the grass in front of Mary Moorman's feet anyway? I believe it's an artifact of alteration. So, all right, John Connally, the governor of Texas, who was also wounded during the assassination, during his Warren Commission testimony, he says, I had seen what was purported to be a copy of the film while I was in the hospital in Dallas. Really, purported is a very interesting word for Connally to use. So then he's asked, Arlen Specter asks him, on which of those slides, I guess maybe he was seeing slides in addition to the film, or instead of the film. And so on which slide were you hit? And he says, I think maybe 130, 131, maybe 134, somewhere in there. And then Specter says, may I suggest to you that it was 231? Okay, so there we go. He's giving Connally a different number, and Connally just kind of goes along with it. Well, 231 and 234 then. James Fetzer points out that in frame 343, here's Kennedy's head, and here's Jackie's white glove. And, you don't see the back of the head blowout in the Zapruder film, or on the autopsy photographs, or anything like that. And yet, here we see her glove through the back of Kennedy's head. So, as for myself, I've noticed a couple of oddities too. Here's a picture of the limousine, specifically the jump seat that Governor Connally was sitting in. And yet in the Zapruder film, we have this very thick cushion jump seat that Connally was supposed to be sitting against. No. And here we have this gentleman's been called the dark-complected man, the Cuban, the accomplice. He's been given different names by researchers over the years. But what I noticed is the flag from the limousine. Here's the flag. And here is the guy's hand waving and the flag covering his hand. Really? Okay, so I'd like to take another look at the Zapruder film, the extant one that we can find online. And I'm going to show you something very interesting that I also noticed. Here we go. All right, I'm going to back this up and I'm going to point out where I would like your attention to be drawn. Watch these reflections that are around Kennedy, like little sparkles here. Don't look at Kennedy, look at the reflections. All right, here we have this reflection, this diamond-shaped reflection that's about to cover his face, which is a non-reflective surface. We have this reflection that's partly on the visor. Again, a non-reflective surface. We have this one that takes on a three-dimensional quality. And they're all forming like this circle around Kennedy that acts like fireworks. Take a look. Until after the splice, and here we see the remnants of the fireworks. Let's take a look at that again. Just watch the reflections. You see how all the reflections behave the same way at the same time? It's like they were added with a light scattering device that was rotated or something as these reflections were put in. And again, let's see. I'm going to show it again. There we see actually the frame before where it was covering his face would have been a better one to show, but yeah, we don't see his face. We see a reflection covering his face. Watch Hickey too, and you'll see him looking down and to the left. He's not, let's see if I can get it again. He is not looking at the bystanders. The bystanders' faces are up here. Hickey is looking down at something this away, in this general direction. Looking down like that, not looking at the bystanders' faces. And then we get, and when you combine the reflections, it's like, hey, look at Kennedy over here. Don't look at this guy up here. Whatever. And he looks fine. I don't really think he is. I think Zapruder's confusion shows us that something has happened before this apparent hand wave here. All right. I want to talk about one other aspect of the film alteration, and this was noticed by a researcher named Scott Myers. Before I talk about Myers, I'm going to talk about subliminal messaging, which in 1963 it was state of the art. In the 70s, a book came out, Francis Keyes, I think, Subliminal Seduction, which I ended up having to teach where I worked up in Rochester, New York. And so I learned about subliminal seduction from that book, or subliminal messaging from that book. And here's like an image from that book. And if you look at the ice cubes, you can see an S, you can see an E, and you can see an X written in the ice cubes. There's actually more subliminal imagery than that. If you look at the reflection of the bottle, you see here's two legs. And if you look at the reflection of the cork, you see something else right there. But we're talking about the Zapruder film, so let's talk about that. This is what Scott Myers saw. This is right before the explosive headshot, frame 312, and he saw in the grass an SEX in the grass. Now here's the frame without Meyer's annotation, and here's the S pretty clearly, the E not quite as clear, but there it is, kind of tilted at an angle, and a smaller X there. Okay. And he used this frame, and he pointed out where he sees the word SEX all over the place, in the grass, in the bushes, on the wall, etc., etc. For me, the clearest one to see is right here. And he doesn't even annotate this one, but I'll show it to you right here. We have the S. We have a capital E, and some of them use lowercase e's. And then we have the X right there. So I don't think Scott Myers is seeing things. I think he's spot on. Maybe some of them. Here's like one in the grass right here. I don't think he's seeing anything. I don't think he's making it up. You can see it in the bushes. There's an S, a lowercase e, and the X there. Again, in 1963, this was state of the art. After the Subliminal Seduction and the other book that this guy wrote was published, and people became more aware of the use of subliminal advertising, certain things became outlawed, but it was still around. You saw George Bush use where they where he took the word Democrats and turned it into a single frame rats, that type of thing. So it's still around there, still around. Just watch out for it. Occasionally, a commercial will even make fun of the use of subliminal advertising. So, in summary, the Zapruder film is not authentic, at least not the extant film that you and I have access to. And here's some ways that we know about it. It contradicts witness accounts, contradicts other accounts like Dan Rather, who saw an early version of the film. I do think it's been altered since before Rather saw it, to take out the limousine stop. Both of them, the slow down and the stop. And again, after, to for whatever purposes, I'm not sure, but if they altered it once, it could have been altered again, and I think that's what happened. The accidental splice, right? The unexplained splices, the Alkin 6 photo, James Chaney, never appears in the Zapruder film. Zapruder's Warren Commission confusion, the problems with the back of the head blowout. I only described one. There's a whole bunch of problems with the Zapruder film. They call it the back of the head blackout. These other researchers do. The jumping lamppost, the Moorman in Hill shoes, the resurrection, the improbable resurrection of JFK, the cushy jump seat, the limo flag, subliminal messages, etc., etc., etc. And as I said, I believe it's gone through several stages of alteration. So that's it for this time. Next time, my next video, I'll discuss my first shot scenario. Because when you realize that the Zapruder film is a fabrication, then you have some more freedom to disagree with what the Zapruder film said. So I'm going to turn to witness statements and give you my first shot scenario. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned for my next presentation.